when you step into freight dispatching, you have to understand something most people never get taught correctly from the beginning, and that is this. As freight dispatching is not just a job where you find loads and call brokers. It is not just negotiating rates. It is not just working a load board. Freight dispatching sits inside a federally regulated transportation system that is controlled by the FMCSA, and every single load board, every carrier, every broker, and every dispatcher has to operate inside that system, whether they understand it or not. And the reason so many people struggle in this industry is because they try to jump straight into the money part without understanding the structure that makes the money possible. So before you even talk about that, truck stop, select us, 123 load board, or anything else, you have to understand the foundation. And that foundation starts with something called an MC number. Now, an MC number sounds powerful. It sounds like it means you're in business. It sounds like it means you can operate, book freight, and start dispatching immediately. But that is not what it is. An MC, an identification number issued by the FMCSA when someone applies to become a motor carrier. That's it. It is not authority. It is not approval. It is not permission to haul freight. It is simply a tracking number that says this person has applied. And this is where a lot of new dispatchers and new carriers make their first major mistake. They think once they get that MC number, they are ready to go to work. But in reality, an MC number by itself is completely inactive in the freight world. It is like having a business name registered, but not having a license to operate, not having insurance, and not being legally cleared to perform the job. So what actually makes an MC number real? What actually activates it? The answer is not one thing. It is a combination of compliance steps that all have to be completed before FMCSA will turn that authority active. The first major requirement is insurance. And this is where people underestimate how important this is. Insurance is not just a formality. It is one of the core requirements that proves a carrier is financially responsible and legally able to operate on public with freight. Without insurance being filed and verified directly with FMCSA, the authority will not activate. It doesn't matter if everything else is done correctly. No insurance means no operation. The second requirement is something called BOC3. Now, BOC3 is one of the most misunderstood parts of this entire system. People hear about it in trucking groups, dispatching courses, YouTube videos, and they think it is something that gives them access to freight or load boards. That is completely incorrect. BOC3 does not give you access to anything in the freight market. What it actually does is designate legal process agents in every state so that if legal documents need to be served to a carrier, there is a registered agent available. It is a legal compliance step required by FMCSA. That's it. So when people say, I got my BOC3, I'm ready to dispatch, that is not how the system works. BOC3 is required for activation, but it does not create operational ability. Then after insurance is filed and BOC3 is processed, FMCSA reviews the entire application. And if everything checks out, they grant active authority status. That is the moment everything changes. Because once the authority is active, the MC number becomes meaningful in the freight system. The carrier is now listed as authorized for property, meaning they are legally allowed to haul freight for compensation. Now, here is where we connect this to dispatching and load boards, because this is where everything actually comes together in the real world. Load boards like Dat Freight and Analytics, Truck Stop, Selectus, and 123 load board are not just marketplaces where you go and pick loads. They are verification systems first and marketplaces second. Their primary job is not to help you find freight. Their primary job is to protect brokers, carriers, and shippers from fraudulent brokering and unverified operators. That means every single carrier that tries to access these systems has to be verified. So when you apply to DAT or Truck Stop, they are not just looking at whether you have an MC number. They are checking, is the authority active? Is insurance filed and valid? Is this carrier legitimate in the FMCSA system right now? If any of those answers are no, access will be restricted or denied. Now let's go into each system so you understand how they actually function in practice. DAT Freight and Analytics is one of the largest load boards in North America, and it is also one of the strictest. Over the years, they have tightened their verification systems significantly because of a fraud in the industry. DAT requires carriers to have active authority and verified insurance before they are fully approved. But here is what most people don't realize. Dispatchers are not usually given independent accounts anymore. In most cases, a dispatcher is added as a user under a carrier's existing account. That means the carrier owns the authority, owns the account, and controls the access, simply operates within that structure. Truck Stop works very similarly. It is another major load board that verifies carriers before granting access. And again, dispatchers are typically added as users or agents under a carrier account rather than operating independently. Selectus is a different type of system altogether. It is not an open public load board in the same way DAT or Truckstop is. It is a closed freight network often used by expedited carriers, fleets, and established logistics operations. You don't simply sign up and start using it. You are typically vetted and approved based on whether you are part of a legitimate carrier network or fleet operation. And then there is 123 load board, which is historically considered slightly more accessible, especially for smaller carriers. But even then, it still requires carrier verification and it still ties access back to active authority. Now, when you put all of this together, you start to understand something very important about dispatching. Dispatchers are not operating as independent freight authorities inside these systems. They are operating. That means the dispatcher is only as powerful as the carrier they are working under. If the carrier has clean authority, active insurance, and a solid compliance history, the dispatcher can operate freely within those systems. But if the carrier is inactive, unverified, or improperly set up, the dispatcher is blocked before they even start. Now, let's talk about where most dispatchers go wrong, because this is where people lose money, lose accounts, and get frustrated. One of the biggest mistakes is trying to get an MC number too early, thinking it will unlock access to everything. They rush the process, apply for authority, and assume they are ready to dispatch before the system has even activated them. But MC without active authority is not functional in the freight ecosystem. Another major mistake is not understanding the difference between FMCSA compliance and load board access. FMCSA controls whether you are legally allowed to operate. Load boards control whether you are allowed to participate in the freight marketplace. Those are two separate systems that overlap, but they are not the same. The mistake is trying to operate multiple MCs or multiple carriers without structure. Load boards monitor behavior patterns. They track logging behavior, booking patterns, IP consistency, authority status, and freight movement behavior. If they detect patterns that resemble double brokering or inconsistent carrier usage, accounts can be flagged or restricted. That's why professional dispatchers operate clean. They stay tied to verified carriers. They don't bounce between MCs randomly. They don't try to work the system in a way that triggers fraud detection. Now, let's talk about what actually works in the real world, because this is where strategy matters. There are two primary ways professional dispatchers operate. The first is carrier-based dispatching. In this model, the carrier gives the dispatcher access to their load board account. The dispatcher logs in, books freight under that MC, and everything stays inside a controlled compliance structure. The second model is multi-carrier dispatching. In this model, the dispatcher works with multiple carriers, and each carrier provides access or authorization. The dispatcher switches between verified MCs depending on who they are booking freight for at the time. But in both cases, the key principle is the same. Dispatchers do not operate outside carrier authority. They operate through it. Now, let's talk about the actual skills that make a dispatcher effective, because this is where most training stops too early. A good dispatcher understands timing. Freight is not just about rate, it is about availability windows. Knowing when freight is posted, how quickly it moves, and how brokers adjust pricing throughout the day is critical. A good dispatcher understands lane behavior. Every lane has patterns. Some lanes tighten in the morning, some loosen in the afternoon, some react to weather, some react to port or regional demand spikes. A good dispatcher understands negotiation psychology. Brokers are not just numbers on a screen. They respond to urgency, consistency, professionalism, and load history. And a good dispatcher understands documentation discipline. Every load, every rate confirmation, every MC interaction must stay clean and consistent. Now let's talk about mistakes again, because this is where most people lose progress. New dispatchers often chase loads instead of building lanes, switch carriers, too frequently ignore compliance structure, misunderstand authority status, rely on one load board instead of understanding all systems. Overestimate how quickly they can scale, and all of these mistakes lead to the same outcome: blocked access, rejected accounts, or unstable freight operations. So when we zoom all the way out, freight dispatching is not just a skill. It is a system-based profession. You are working inside a regulated federal framework, interacting with compliance systems, insurance systems, carrier authority systems, and marketplace verification systems all at the same time. And how those systems connect, everything becomes easier, because now you are not guessing. You are operating with structure. And that is the difference between someone who struggles in dispatching and someone who builds a real long-term operation in this industry.